Good afternoon, everyone. We're pleased to have you join us today for our KSIG on supporting your career and research with foundation funding. We are going to follow Dr. Bear time, which basically means we're going to wait another minute or two to see if we gain other participants. We hope that this program will allow you to recognize all of the very, very many different ways you have to foster your career by, some would say, starting small and building, and others would say potentially utilizing this foundation funding opportunity to really learn the ropes as to how to write a grant, how to write a proposal, where you're going to run into barriers, and to use it as a real initiation tool for future federal funding. So I'm going to wait one more minute. And I think we'll start. So again, welcome one more time. We have 3 individuals who are going to be addressing you today, and they're going to each introduce themselves, and I'm going to go on mute and also go dark. So Susan, would you like to start and then turn it over to your colleagues in crime?
You bet. My name is Sue Flaherty. I'm the Director of Foundation Relations at Children's National. I've been doing fundraising for about 30 years, half of that time specifically in the foundation relations area. So foundation contact and grant work. Susan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for spending time with us today. My name is Susan Boerstling, and I head up the foundation relations team at GW. I've been at GW for 8 years, actually hit my 8-year mark in about 2 weeks. And before starting at GW, I worked at a small strategic communications nonprofit for about 13 years, doing their fundraising work, which was primarily all grants from national foundations. And then prior to that organization, I worked at Georgetown University for a couple of years, also in their corporate and foundation relations office. So Foundation Relations Office, just real briefly at GW, we're part of the Central Development Team, meaning we work across all the schools and units at the university, supporting faculty and centers and institutes and deans with their foundation engagement and solicitation and stewardship strategies. In addition to me, there's 2 other frontline foundation fundraisers on the team. One, Sarah, you'll hear from in a moment. Then we actually also have another person joining the team in just a few weeks who will be focused on health and medicine. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll turn it over to you, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Katz, and I'm the Associate Director of Foundation Relations at GW. In addition to the School of Medicine and Health Sciences, I work across several schools and units at GW to support faculty applications to foundations. Prior to GW for 7 years, I was the development director at a local homeless services organization, which included extensive work in both government and private grant management, as well as individual giving and broader community engagement. And then before that, I also supported a large grant-making program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in healthcare financing and organization research. I am very happy to be here today and looking forward to the conversation with everyone.
Let me go over very quickly our presentation. We'll be covering a lot of material quickly, but we will have time for questions, both throughout the presentation and at the end. We'll be covering the basics of foundation funding, the landscape specifically for medicine and health. We'll go through a little case study with the Doris Duke Foundation, and we have some resources for you at the end and helpful tips. housekeeping perspective, if you have questions as we go along, please do put them in the chat and we'll stop at those breaks and try to answer them or let you know that we'll be covering them in the second part of the presentation. And I think everybody has already muted themselves, but at the end, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions.
And then before we get going, we have a little short poll that we thought might be helpful for folks if you would just be willing to take a moment and to answer if you have applied for foundation or association funding before. That will give us a sense of people's experience and perhaps familiarity with the material, and then we can kind of customize our comments accordingly. Let's give everyone a moment to do that, and then the results should pop up. All right, what do we have? So no, but interested. Yes, did receive funding. Okay, this is great. We have a nice cross section of folks with different levels of experience, and then also invite folks during the breaks or at the end or whatever makes sense. If folks that want to share some of their experiences with others on the call, we would certainly welcome that. So thank you. Okay, good. So why pursue foundation funding? Why is this something that you might want to consider if you haven't already? And there's several different reasons in which we think that you should be interested in pursuing this type of funding. Foundation funding for health and medicine is increasing. In 2019, which is the most recent year in which we have data, foundation giving was $75 billion in the US, reaching its highest ever dollar amount. Giving by foundations has grown in 9 out of the last 10 years. And if you look at the top 5 subject areas by dollar amount, health is the highest area, receiving 28% of foundation dollars, followed by education at 24%. So this group here is well positioned to be able to tap into some of the large amounts of dollars and the subject area interest by foundations. Funding for research and projects that are not a good fit for federal opportunities. Many foundations will encourage experimental activity in projects that are high risk and high reward. Those often are not always favorably received by federal funding, so this is where foundations can be a real asset. Many foundations focus on emerging issues, also newly identified needs. And also foundations are overwhelmingly interested in interdisciplinary research. Also another area where it can be a little bit harder to secure federal dollars. So if your projects fit into that category, then foundations could indeed be a good fit for your work. And also if you, perhaps maybe you have a project that has a big community outreach component, and maybe you want to work with local youth around eliminating health disparities, for instance. Something like that is not likely to secure federal funding, but could be a really good fit for local funders. So those are some of the reasons that the type of project can be attractive to foundations. Foundations can become champions of your work. They have invested in you. Your success is their success. They want the project to go well, and they want you to succeed. So it depends on the foundation, the culture of the foundation, and just the personality of your program officer, about how engaged the program officer might be. But often they're usually experts in the field themselves. They have their own networks. If you come across an issue or an obstacle and you need some help thinking it through, like, they can be really good thought partners as well. And even they can connect you to other funders. For instance, may open up their networks to other funders in the space. I've even had a couple of times over my career instances where maybe a foundation could no longer continue funding a project that maybe had funded for a couple of years, and they were even able to do some talk amongst themselves with other funders. Of course, funders talk to each other, and even was able to line up some funding to help keep that project funded. So just nice ways in which your program officers can really become advocates and champions of your work. Networking and professional development opportunities. Also, another component of a lot of grants, not all of them, but certainly some of them, for instance, they might have like a required annual convening, for instance, that if you get awarded by that foundation, you're expected to participate. And of course, that can be a great networking opportunity to meet others in your field, or perhaps other early career faculty and clinicians. So those are some nice sort of side benefits that foundation funding can provide. And some programs, of course, are specifically geared towards career development, for perhaps like Josiah Macy Jr. Foundation and the Macy Faculty Scholars. So folks may be familiar with that program. GW had a Macy Faculty Scholar a few years ago, someone from the School of Nursing. So for Macy, in addition to funding the educational change project at the home institution, there's also a lot of other benefits that are kind of baked into the program. With the scholars, it's a cohort model, for instance. They also receive a lot of mentoring and career advice from the National Advisory Committee. Another example is also from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Harold Amos Medical Faculty Development Program. And that program is for physicians and nurses from historically underserved or disadvantaged backgrounds. That actually is open right now, just as a little aside, with applications due next month for anyone that might be interested. But again, this program is also one in which there's a cohort model with a lot of interaction and exchange with other scholars. So say not all foundation awards have this component, but many of them do. And of course, some of the ones that are geared specifically towards career development, usually have some really nice opportunities to build and to network and to grow. There's a prestige factor with certain awards and funders. It's a feather in your cap, right? If you receive funding from, ones that are really well known, like a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Award or Howard Hughes Medical Institute. These are also, reasons in which you may be interested in pursuing foundation funding. And then also, some foundations, particularly the larger ones, they'll have like robust communications and marketing departments themselves. So, if you get funded, they're going to be doing press release, right? It's probably announcing the grants, and they may have newsletters and their websites, and some of them have, very nice, really big annual reports. And so in addition to the grant being announced, often they'll be doing grantee highlights or profiles in certain projects or faculty. And so those can also be nice visibility and just other opportunities to kind of get your work out there. And then diverse funding sources is the last thing that I wanted to mention. Like a lot of things in life, often wise to not have all your eggs in one basket, right? So same thing here, certainly prudent to not rely on one funding source. If you have options to diversify, foundation fundraising, or foundation funding, as I mentioned earlier, continues to rise. So just another, thing to think about as you think about your career and your different sources of revenue. Okay, so moving on. So here's some things I'm calling foundation funding reality. So like these are certain norms within the field that we thought it would be helpful for folks to be familiar with if you're not already, just so you can help to familiarize yourself with the lay of the land, if you will. So first of all, foundation requests must be strongly aligned with the foundation's goals. This is so important. I really can't stress this enough. It is really important that you have alignment, there is a fit. It is just absolutely critical in being successful in your applications. Foundations over time have become much more specific in terms of what they're funding, how they want to fund it, how they want to go about, making an impact in their area. And so again, things are just getting tighter and tighter. There's usually a lot of information in an RFP, request for proposals, about what they're looking for and what's important to them, and the types of grants that they'll be awarding. So it's usually in the RFP. Of course, read it really closely. But if there isn't a lot of information, you definitely poke around their website. for on their website, because there's going to be additional information there. There's going to be other materials, maybe say annual reports, other things they put out there that you could use as tools to really kind of get at what it is that's important to them, how are they going to do their funding, what are the kind of projects that are going to be competitive. So that way, if it's not in the RFP, like definitely take a little more time poking around just to make sure that you have that fit, because it is so important. There's often a quick turnaround times for submission of letters of inquiry or the proposals themselves. Letters of inquiry are also sometimes called letter of intent, if you've heard it called that, often referred to as LOIs. So just wanted to make sure you're familiar with that. And LOIs are for foundations that have a two-step funding process, and not all do, but some of them do. But just again, to be aware that some foundations will have their funding cycles, and you can put it in your calendar, right? It's every year, it's every 2 years, where a certain deadline is gonna, for proposal is gonna come up, and it's pretty consistent year after year. But then also they may have something that comes up. It's some sort of special initiative, for instance, that comes up. And so those can often be a really quick turnaround time, like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, usually not much more than that. So if there's a foundation that you've identified or an association that is a good fit for your work, like I would really suggest that you bookmark the website, bookmark the foundation website, or, maybe bookmark specifically the page that they usually put the funding opportunities. And just, every few weeks, just take a quick, jump on their website for 30 seconds and just scroll down really fast and make sure something hasn't come up, because, there is nothing worse than coming across something right after, the deadline is passed. That's really upsetting. So, so just get in the habit of doing that. Again, just one way in which foundations seem to operate a little bit differently than federal funding. And so the other thing to point out is that there's frequently no indirect costs, or it's very low. It is always well underneath the federally negotiated rate that is much, much higher, certainly for GW and for Children's National. Often it's no indirect costs, or 10 or 15%, occasionally 20%, but it's usually in the 10 to 15%. This is because foundations really see that the institution is supporting the work, that this is the institution's sort of skin in the game, if you will, and that's by providing the facilities and other infrastructure that's needed to do the project or to do the research. So again, these policies are almost always in writing by the foundation or the association. So there's no problem in terms of, from GW's perspective, from sponsored projects and developing the budget, as long as it's in writing, of course, it's going to be honored. So just wanted to put that out there. So again, folks are aware this is one way in which foundations operate a little bit differently. Typically there's a lack of transparency and feedback. Like if your proposal, is declined, hopefully it's not, but if it's declined, you're not going to get feedback in terms of formal written comments or written comments. That is, just something that's, just not done in the foundation world. Occasionally there will be opportunities to contact the foundation to maybe, to ask, if there's any feedback they can provide, and, why the foundation or why that proposal wasn't funded. Again, most of the time they don't, but when they do, definitely take advantage of that. It's a really nice chance to jump on a phone call with a program officer, develop a relationship, particularly if you don't already have one. So just kind of be on the lookout for that. If that's something that they're open to, definitely take advantage of it if so. And then the last thing I wanted to say is just, it's really competitive. Most foundations don't share their acceptance rates, but unfortunately it's often in the single digits. It may be frequent when a press announcement comes out, or, here are the 5 projects that were funded, and they may say we had over 100 applications, right? So just again, to be aware that foundation funding is, also quite competitive. And that's why it's so important with what I was saying earlier about making sure you have a really strong fit and that your projects are really good alignment for what they're seeking to fund. Okay, so I'm going to pause right here just to see if anyone has any kind of initial questions. If so, we can maybe tackle a couple right now, or we'll also have some, say, another break on, and then at the end. Let's see, is anything come in? Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sue, and she is going to provide information pertaining to foundations specifically in medicine and health, as well as how to prepare competitive applications and how our offices can assist you in this process. Sue?
All right. Susan mentioned that health and medicine funding is growing. It certainly is, and so is the funding for research from private foundations and associations. Last year, there was $11 billion contributed specifically to research from foundations, so there is money out there. Much of this money is new money, having been contributed by mega funders. The Wellcome Trust has been around since 1955, but new money like the Bill Gates Foundation, Paul Allen, Mark and Priscilla Zuckerberg all have foundations giving in the science area and giving at nearly the $1 billion mark alone. Our offices can help you with working with private foundations. Some may be large with professional staff. Some may be much smaller. We can help you with association fundraising. It's sort of all organizations fall under our aegis. As far as, you'll find that there are disease-specific foundations which may work for you in your area of study, like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation or the American Heart Association. Usually they'll want to support you as you move to becoming an independent researcher. So they're seeking creative and effective leaders for the next generation. Most have a limit on how many years since you've been out of residency that you can qualify. And some require you to be on a tenure track and say an assistant professor title as you're moving. Let's go to the next slide. So we can help you at a number of stages. We can help you from identifying prospects for your proposal, outreach and coordination with those professionals, developing the proposal itself, which may take some strategy, and stewardship. So we have a couple of resources at our site at our disposal for prospect identification. And one of the things is we subscribe to many of these funders' newsletters so that we receive postings of opportunities as soon as they come out. The CFR website, which Sarah will talk a little bit more about later, is also a good resource at GW. You can see the slides. I don't want to have to read them to you, but strategy development, limited submissions, foundation visits, we can help with all of that. Proposal enhancement, editing and framing. A lot of what you need to do is frame your proposal properly to be a strong competitor for that foundation. And I'll talk about that on the next page. And we can help you with stewardship, certainly thank you letters or narrative reports and check-in calls with the foundation. Next slide. Probably the most important thing to focus on in your proposal is the very beginning, which is usually the area where you articulate the need. Make sure that you're articulating the need of real people. That's for foundations, they're less interested in your impact in the field unless it's going to have a profound impact on the people you're serving, as in terms of managing the disease or curing the disease. And you can look at a few years out at that. A lot of foundations are looking for that impact on underserved or marginalized patients. You'll need to demonstrate that your proposal is unique. Why should they fund you and why now? There's an intersection with the development offices, which Sarah will handle in a moment, but I just want to draw your attention to the questions to consider when you're developing your proposal. I think they get you in the right frame of mind for where grant reviewers are going to be, foundation grant reviewers heads are. And if you have any questions about those, I'd be happy to take those at the end. Sarah?
Great, thank you, Sue. I'm going to address how the different offices you'll work with during the proposal submission process support your work and the coordinating role that the Office of Foundation Relations plays. I want to note that this slide represents GW's research administration structure. The exact structures may be slightly different at Children's, but the overall spirit of how the different offices work together is largely the same. So essentially, almost any funding that we see from foundations these days, and for GW, this is across schools and units, and even for activities that, on their face you wouldn't really think of as research, they're going to be classified as sponsored research activity due to the terms and conditions attached to that funding, which means that proposal submissions will need to go through the process of being approved by the sponsored research office. On this diagram, first on the left side, you see our office at GW, the CFR, the Office of Corporate and Foundation Relations first. Our team are all experienced frontline fundraisers, and we can assist you in many different ways with proposal development that Sue spoke about a few minutes ago. So this is the big picture issues, strategy, overall foundation fit. Do we have a connection at the foundation that can help you? Also helping to edit your proposal, but really down to the more granular or administrative tasks. We have all the usual institutional attachments that funders ask for really handy. So audited financials, IRS Form 990s, information about the board of GW. And we can also help you draft and gather letters of support. So we'll work with your faculty mentors, but we can also do some of the more time-consuming legwork, like handling the process for getting letters from senior leaders. So in the School of Medicine and Health Sciences, people like Dean Bass or Bob Miller if required. The circles on this diagram overlap because our office acts as in a liaison role to all the others. The next circle represents the school-based research administrators, now called the research pods at GW. So Pod 3 serves the School of Medicine and Health Sciences, the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and the School of Nursing. The pods basically do all of the work, both internal and external, to prepare the application for submission to the foundation and to receive the necessary internal institutional approvals. So typically the largest and most time-consuming task for them and for you as the investigator is the work on budget preparation and approval. So this includes both internal budgets for GW, but also external ones conforming to the foundation's requirements. So during this process, we in the Foundation Relations Office are here to help. The research administration structure is set up largely to deal with federal applications and awards. And so sometimes there's a bit of a sort of fitting a round peg into a square hole problem when working with moving foundation applications through these offices. We consult with them throughout the process to make sure that the application will conform to the foundation's guidelines. Also, and at least at GW, this is a very big system to work in, and especially if it's your first time, it can be pretty intimidating. We work in the system very often, and even if we don't know the answer to a question, we definitely usually know the person to figure it out, so we can really serve as a navigator and help to lead you through the process. So finally, on the last circle, there's the Office of Sponsored Projects and the Office of the Vice President for Research. OSP gives the final approval to submit, ensuring that the application complies with university guidelines, and post-award, they would be the ones to set up your grant administration. Next slide, please. So I wanted to present a short case study on one early career program, which is the Doris Duke Foundation's Clinical Scientist Development Award. Prior to the presentation, you received the first 7 pages of the RFP, which contains most of the substantive information on the program. I wanted to share a few things about this opportunity and highlight a few features of it that are common to other early career opportunities and a few things that are different. So first of all, the basics. This award is $150,000 a year for 3 years with 10% indirect costs allowed each year for a total of $495,000. The award is for early career physicians at the instructor or assistant professor rank to support clinical research that will enable their transition to independent research funding. This program is similar to many other early career opportunities in that its purpose is to provide awardees with protected time to grow and develop their research careers. Doris Duke and many other funders recognize that one of the biggest challenges to young physicians in developing their clinical research careers is actually finding the time to conduct that research along with your busy schedules as healthcare providers. So secondly, what do they want to fund? They wish to support clinical research with high significance for human health. And you'll notice that the foundation has its own definition of clinical research, which can be found on page 5 of the RFP. So the Clinical Scientist Development Award is really broad and supports physicians across specialties in contrast to many other career opportunities, which can be specialty specific and put out by a specific specialty society. But it's important to know that they still have a very clear idea of what they want, and you'll need to align your application with that. So some other things to point out that are very common to other early career opportunities: very extensive eligibility requirements. You can review these on page 1 to 3 of the RFP. So these eligibility requirements also typically relate to both time and stage in your career. So when you were awarded your terminal degree or when you received your first faculty appointment, but also to prior research funding. So for this program, if you've already been a PI on a significant grant, which they lay out the specifics for in the RFP, or have an application pending as a PI for an R01, you're not eligible because the program intends to support researchers at an earlier stage in their career. But you'll also see for the time-based eligibility requirements, there can be exceptions. So for example, did you take a maternity leave that somehow impacted your eligibility timeline? You can reach out and ask for an exemption, and this RFP contains a clear process for doing so and who to contact at the foundation to get that approval. So, and finally, for different RFPs, it's important to mention that there are often sort of random odds and ends and peculiarities to each one, so which highlight the need for really reading everything thoroughly when you're preparing your application. So for this one, for Doris Duke, there is projects cannot include animal research. And this is in accordance with the wishes of Doris Duke herself in her will when she set up the foundation. So again, this one also has peculiarities. You can propose a project that maybe the initial evidence for it was found and conducted through animal research, but the proposed project for this particular award cannot include animal research at all. So to close a little bit to talk about the process and the competitiveness, this is a multi-stage process, which is typical of these larger early career programs, with an initial pre-proposal submission, a full proposal invitation, and then 2 months to submit a full proposal, which is actually a decent amount of time. Sometimes foundations have less reasonable turnaround times from the LOI to full proposal stage. So in terms of the competitiveness of this award, it is very competitive. It's a large, prestigious national program. Each year, there are about 200 to 300 applications, and each year about 20 to 25%, according to the foundation, are actually eliminated during administrative review, which means that the application does not conform to guidelines in some way. Either the applicant does not meet eligibility requirements or the proposed project is out of scope. From there, the applications go to a phase 1 review, which is conducted by a panel of scientists who are knowledgeable about the physician scientist career path, representing a broad a broad cross-section of specialties, but they may not be scientific experts in your application. So in addition to evaluating your actual project, at this stage, reviewers are also looking very closely at strong evidence of institutional support. From there, about 50 people are invited to submit full proposals, and at that stage, the application does receive expert review. And then ultimately, the foundation selects 12 to 18 individuals to award. So as you can see, very competitive, and this is an example of one. It's a big opportunity that kind of comes up like clockwork every year, with typically very little changes year to year. I think they did recently make some changes in terms of eligibility, like by adding people at the instructor rank to their eligibility requirements. And this year they added some language about if COVID-19 impacted your eligibility timeline in some way to how to get an exemption. But typically this is a pretty solid program that appears like clockwork every year without a lot of major changes. Okay, I think we're ready for the next slide. So finally, we're going to close with a few quick resources for you. Before I show GW's CFR website, I just want to mention the one resource that came out to you in advance of this presentation was an Excel sheet full of early career opportunities. So this basically represents all of the opportunities at GW that we're circulating and posting to faculty on a regular basis. And just with the caveat that it was current at the time that we gathered it all up, it's impossible to catch everything. We tried to put the current or most recent due date on there, but please do verify everything. And it's also important to mention, I think, in medicine and health, that there are some regular opportunities from some association funders, like say the American Cancer Society or the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Some of those organizations have had their funding heavily impacted by COVID-19 because they've lost their ability to do some of their large fundraising events. So there are some RFPs you'll find from some groups that are reliant upon fundraising themselves that may have been canceled during this time. So please just check and verify before digging any deeper. So we're going to pull up and look at GW's Corporate and Foundation Relations website. Great, so this is the office for this is the website for the Office of Corporate and Foundation Relations, which is cfr.gwu.edu. And I hope you'll have a chance to look over it really thoroughly. I think it's a great resource. But for now, I'm just going to hit a few highlights, mainly our funding database. So as you can see here, we have multiple tabs to help with your search. On this main landing page here, just to point out the ones that will be most of interest to you, early career opportunities, fellowship opportunities, and then on the left-hand side, you can also see that RFPs are broken out by subject area. So for example, if you click on early career, you'll have a list of opportunities. Now, most of these, because this is just where most early career opportunities lie, do happen to be in medicine and health or closely related fields, although this website is for all of GW. So you may see some opportunities here that are not medicine and health focused, but most of the opportunities here tend to be. So you can see they're arranged by due date, and this website is constantly updated and maintained by our office. So things are gone when they're not up anymore, and we're posting new stuff pretty much on a daily basis. And then if we go back just to that main database landing page, I'll just point out one more section, which is the limited submission opportunities. So for GW, so oftentimes there are opportunities where the university can only submit one application or maybe two applications. And in that case, the university requires that we have an internal competition. So this links to so we have maintained this on our page, but these competitions, we operate them in conjunction with the Research Enhancement Unit in the Office of Sponsored Projects. So if you are working on one of these actually looks like the LSOs we have now. None of them are medicine and health related, but basically the internal competition page can be found. We link to it on this page, but it's run by the Research Enhancement Unit. And so this will have all the information about what our internal deadline is, and then we will get back to you if you were selected. So we can help you submit that full application. So I think that's it for the website. But like I said, I hope you'll spend some time on it. There's a lot of good resources there, and also all of our contact information is there and ways to reach us. I'm just going to talk briefly next about the Foundation Directory online. This is a resource that our office has access to, and we do have the ability to share logins with interested faculty. Basically, it's a database that contains information on all foundations in the US. I don't know that it's the most useful tool in the medicine and health field, especially for early career opportunities, because for those, the foundations have all of that information out there for you. I don't think you would necessarily find any additional information here. However, if a foundation doesn't release a lot about, say, what their grant funding levels look like, or if there's any other information that you want to know, it can be useful sometimes to dig around here and pull things up. So if you have specific questions, you can always reach out to us, or if you're really interested, we can share that login information with you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who's going to just finish up talking about some of our resources.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So one other resource for folks to be aware of is called Pivot, and it used to be called Community of Science. So you may still hear referred to sometimes by that, or COS. That's a database of federal, foundation, and nonprofit funding opportunities. Pivot does allow you to customize your search, and they'll send you a weekly email based on the parameters that you set. So so that's a nice feature, and you may want to check it out. Just in terms of for foundations that are in there, like I think it's okay for foundations. I think Foundation Directory Online or our CFR website, you know, may be more useful, I find, because I also sign up and I receive the emails, and sometimes they're really obscure foundations and a lot of things that aren't necessarily in the US that do a lot of international funding, but a little bit of US funding. So to kind of take it with a grain of salt on the foundation side. But anyways, it's a good resource for federal and for other things as well. So you might want to check it out. And you can see the URL that's on the slide in front of you to get to the page. That's actually the Pivot subscriptions are managed by the Sponsored Projects Office, not managed by the Foundation Relations Office. But if you visit the place on the website where Pivot is described on the Sponsored Projects website, on their website will be information on how to contact them to get access for it, because it is something you need to request permission, and then you can get signed up. So just to be aware of that. Another resource as well is GuideStar, and many folks are probably already familiar with GuideStar. It's been around for a while. Foundation Directory and GuideStar actually merged 2 years ago, and they formed a new nonprofit entity called Candid, although they still maintain their separate website. So GuideStar is easy to set up an account. If you just have to get the basic account, it's free. And why you might want to do that, it's not as good for throwing out different search terms and trying to come up with a prospect list. Definitely there's better ways to do it than GuideStar. What GuideStar is useful for is getting access to the 990s. And if you're not familiar with that term, 990s, it's the tax return that has to be filed by the foundation each year to the IRS. The full name is the IRS 990 PF. PF stands for private foundation. And so the 990s are a really great tool, and you can get it through GuideStar or Foundation Directory online. Of course, it's being a tax return, it's always going to be a little bit delayed, right? You're going to be seeing information from usually like at least 2 years prior. But still, it's a really good tool. And so it's particularly helpful for maybe if the foundation or association doesn't list a lot of information on their website, right? Or they have a little bit, or they just have a partial list of their grantees, or there's just maybe it's hard to get a feel for their grant sizes if they don't come right out and say it. So the 990 is a great tool because they have to report it to the IRS. So when you access the 990, the pieces to look for is the first page, and about like a fourth of the way down on the left-hand side is going to list their asset size. And that's really key to understand. Is it a $10 million foundation, a $100 million foundation? And then a little further down on that first page is going to be their grant making for that year. Also, if you really want to kind of dig around and get into it, something like that our office will often do sometimes is to go back a couple of years to see, like, is there giving kind of consistent year to year, or do you see big swings? Something to look for. And then about like maybe 2/3 or 3/4 of the way in is where you're going to find their list of grantees. And sometimes they do an attachment. It comes at the very, very end. And that's going to list all of the grants that they awarded for that year. So really helpful to be able to see the range. Are most of the grants, you know, around a certain dollar size? You see big swings. You know, are they funding mostly universities, so presumably research type projects, or is it really maybe skews a little bit more direct service kind of organizations? So again, that can let you know, all right, you know, maybe what I want to propose isn't a good fit. You know, again, most of the time it's on the RFP or on the website, but occasionally you do come across a funder where it's a little bit harder, or particularly if you come across something that maybe they talk a lot about a particular geographical area, and they say, and that they also fund nationally. And you know, so you could look at their 990 if the information isn't otherwise on their website to really be able to assess, yeah, okay, you know, the vast majority of the funding was limited to whatever, Texas or the Pennsylvania area or whatever, with very few national grants. So again, it's just going to help you as you determine what's a good fit. How do you want to spend your time? Are you going to be competitive enough to put the proposal in? And so it just can be another tool to be aware of to really understand their giving priorities. And so at this point, this concludes the formal part of our presentation. We'd love to open it up to questions, discussions. I mentioned earlier, if there are folks that want to maybe share some of their experiences, if for folks that have either submitted proposals and they weren't funded, or they, hopefully you were successful, what that was like, if, anything that you would do differently next time around. Just, love to kind of to open it up to everybody. Say, feel free to do in the chat or unmute yourself.
I have a quick question. So I applied for a Doris Duke actually. So one thing that came up is that, for example, the specific aims that you proposed in your letter of intent, most of the time those are very similar to what I'm planning for my KA. We are people who are applying for KA or in the same line. And some, I think from what I understand from talking to Sarah, is that some of this foundation will require you to have different aims than your other to a KA, and you can maintain your grant. And others will say if you have similar aims, you have to drop this foundation grant when you get a K, which it put you in a very hard position when you're applying for sending an LOI. So I don't know what would be the right strategy, if you have to think ahead then, or you can change it later, when you're sending the full proposal, if you get selected for that. So that's, if you can teach us a little bit about how to strategize that.
Which one of you ladies would like to take that?
I can start really quickly because I had the pleasure to work with Dr. Golapur when we were applying for Doris Duke. It's very, very tricky. I think it sort of gets to the overall point that Susan was making at the beginning, right? Which is that foundations are really interested in uniqueness and funding something that's not being replicated elsewhere. So this is where it gets tricky with the specific aims with the K award and, part of the overall really extensive eligibility requirements. I don't know. I mean, this is a really tricky question. And I'll pause when I'm done to see if anyone else wants to chime in. And I see Allison is typing something. So Allison says, it's important to let all funders know where else you have applied for funding or that might be pending. Yes, very much so. Sometimes you need to separate your aims from a mentor's aims or from other grant applications. So I will say, I mean, hopefully something like this, I think can be helpful in letting everyone know about the other opportunities that are out there, and that what foundations might be looking for, and sort of the range of opportunities. So something like Doris Duke is really big, and they're looking for a really big specific aim that's different from your K award. But there's maybe smaller ones that you can, if you think about your work as a whole, and smaller things that can be spun off. I'm going to pause because maybe Allison, you have something that you.
Yeah, I just had an experience where a career mentor development award actually put in aims that were funded from the mentor's R01. And there was a question about overlap, and unfortunately the candidate was not selected for funding. I think this was actually a relatively innocent mistake, but it was definitely a mistake. So it is crucially important that you identify your own specific aims and are very clear about how they do or don't overlap with other grant applications you have. You can apply for multiple grants to pay for the same research, but at the end of the day, you can only accept one for a particular scope of work. So everybody knows that you're probably applying for several things, but you do need to tailor it for whatever foundation or mission the funder is after. But please be super clear about letting people know where else you might have funding or pending funding.
And a lot of applications will, require you to, share that information. If something is already committed or pending, or at what stage it can be. And foundations typically, don't want to be the only one funding
Right.
the project. They really do like other funders for a variety of reasons. One, which I think it can make them, they want to, it's being funded by a lot of sources. That way it's not on them to continue funding it, or if they stop funding it, the project stops, the research stops, but to really see a lot of funders that are also excited and invested in the research. I think that's also another way that foundation funding can differ a little bit from federal funding.
The other point that I would make is that oftentimes the amount of funding from a foundation really can only help you with a specific aim or the progression of a single aspect of your research, and that's fine. Thrasher, for example, is a perfect example of them recognizing that you might have a multiplicity of aims, but they will only and can only fund one. We also have a question from Allison Silveski. I will read it, which is, how much back and forth is possible with the foundation before submission? As Susan knows, I submitted a William T. Grant Foundation proposal recently, and after submitting the 100-page proposal, I got 2-sentence feedback, one of which was, there is insufficient fit between the proposal's main research question and the foundation's research interest. It would have been nice to know this in advance before spending months preparing this application. Allison, I did the same thing with exactly the William T. Grant Foundation about 4 years ago. I will never apply to them again. But responses from the group. How much back and forth is allowable? Where does one find a sufficient amount of information to know whether the fit is a good fit or a bad fit? Do you, as foundation professionals, help an investigator with that, or does the investigator try to get that information out of the program officer or equivalent individual at the foundation before they invest an enormous amount of time and energy?
I think we all help with that. In many cases, we may have a contact at that foundation already that we can talk to if there's no clear program officer to go to. And I would say it depends on the foundation, whether they have the staff to field those calls. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is pretty accessible as far as these things go. Other foundations, you'd be surprised, like the Adelson Foundation only has one staff person. So we can help you determine that, and we can make those calls and kind of suck it up and just make the call to find out if they will take a call.
Yeah, and just to build on what Sue said, and then if Susan has anything else to add, it can also really depend on the timing. So for example, some foundations can be pretty open to general outreach. So to kind of have like a general phone call with a program officer, this is what we're thinking about, how does it sound, but sometimes for these big opportunities, they will be sometimes the same foundation, which might be more open to general things. Sometimes around these really big RFPs, they can be very closed off. They can include a lot of language in their RFP about like we don't have time, no calls, like we don't, and that's why they'll have these extremely extensive eligibility and FAQs. And if you want to do this, you have to do this and this. So that's where it really, I think, really gets tricky. And I'll see if Susan has anything else. But like Sue said, that's what we can help you determine that.
Yeah, I think it's very much the case by case, right? I mean, that's what kind of makes the work at times like so much fun, because it's different and there's a lot of variety, and we certainly don't get bored in our jobs. But at the other time, it would sometimes be nice to have a little more consistency. And so I think it's also, the foundation, and they will often be very, as there's no calls or push people toward the webinar. I mean, a lot of them increasingly, have webinars to talk about opportunities where there could be chances to ask, some broad questions, right? And it's hard to really get into or monopolize a webinar to really talk about your particular project, but sometimes that can be enough to then have a follow-up conversation afterwards. I think things sometimes can get a little bit trickier as it gets closer to the deadline, right? As they may just be more inundated with calls. Also, some faculty that are considering something, they're kind of going back and forth, or maybe just, you know, caught their attention kind of close to the deadline. Like sometimes also to make kind of a bit of a strategic decision, if it's really close to the deadline and you're asking some really basic questions and maybe is an opportunity that was put out months in advance, you know, we have to kind of weigh that too, right? To also to not tip our hand that, yeah, we haven't started the application, or we're just thinking about it and it's due in, you know, 9 days, so, or 7 days or whatever. So kind of all those different things that go into what's appropriate for that particular situation with that foundation. And again, if we have a relationship, that's one thing. If they've been funding a lot at the university, there's, you know, there's just a lot of touch points. Then even if they say, okay, we usually don't, for staffing reasons, you know, just don't have the capacity to field these kind of calls. But if it's one in which there's already a lot of, say, touch points with the university and that foundation, you know, then we can usually, you know, at least get a little bit of feedback. It's, you know, maybe not going to be super extensive, but at least enough to help you assess, is this a good fit? Should I continue? And then also sometimes, you know, I think they will only go so far. You know, they can ask some probing questions and help, you know, think through if this is something that's going to be a fit or not. But, you know, they're going to probably refrain from saying, yeah, this is something that really excites us or not, and kind of put the ball back in, you know, the faculty members' court to decide, if you will, which those can be a little bit, you know, sometimes a little bit frustrating too, to feel like, you know, you're not quite getting at a good read of whether or not this is going to be competitive.
So I have to leave and Allison is going to take over, but I just want to make sure that everybody on the Zoom recognizes that if you are a GW faculty person, you can access the foundation, and Allison is going to give you a little bit more information on Research Matters, which I know some of you are on, but others of you may know less about. So thank you for participating. Allison, take over. Thank you so much, our speakers, and more later.
Okay. So I don't have an enormous amount to add. I put the link to Research Matters in the chat for those of you who aren't in there. Any faculty at GW or Children's is welcome to be a subscriber to the pivot searches we put out every week in 25 different research areas. If you go to the link, you'll see that some of them are sort of public health or patient-centered research. Others are in traditional cancer, neurology, etc. We tell you how we do the searches, and you'll get an email at your preferred email every week. We have about 700 subscribers to that. And if you have any questions about it, you can look online, or you can give me a quick email and we'll add you and we'll create your research links. So I think that's really great. I want to ask one last question of our visitors, and that is, how would you like the people on this call to access you? Do you want them all to email you tomorrow? Would you like them to email you when they find an area of interest? How would you like them to interact with you?
Yeah, I think it's all fine. If there's already areas where people have projects that are actively funding, let us know, and then we can use that when we're looking. Austin Alvarez, who's also on the call, supports all the website and the fantastic work that goes into it and the write-ups. And the more that we're aware, and sometimes we do come across things like, oh, is this a fit? It's not a fit. So just the larger sense of the projects that folks are working on, the research areas, is super helpful. And reach out to any of us individually. We have our individual emails on the PowerPoint, or the CFR at gw.edu is the overall office email for GW folks. And, you know, Austin is checking that thing at least hourly. So we're definitely, you know, approachable and accessible. So whatever works for people, we're happy to customize and be flexible to whatever needs to be done.
Okay. Well, I don't know if there are other questions. Patrick has also put in the chat an evaluation that I hope all of you will fill out to let us know how well this session worked and what else we might be able to do. I want to thank our speakers for working together to put together a great session that actually speaks to the researchers we have across our campuses. So I really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Our pleasure. Bye-bye.